We're back with Module 9 of the Life After Pornography program, and we're going to talk about ways to restore connections with people in our life and how to actually focus on ourselves instead of our struggle as we have those conversations. And then we'll also introduce the ultimate willingness question that really brings together all the things we've talked about in the Life After Pornography program. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Brian as we review Module 9 of the Life After Pornography program.
If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio.
Well, we're back again. In this conversation, we're going to cover Module 9 of the Life After Pornography program. We are nearing the end of this 10-module sequence, and this is one of the shorter modules, but one of the more impactful ones. And a lot of this focus is on, now that we've started to rethink this struggle and understand ourselves a little bit better in relation to sexuality and how our minds work. In the previous module, I invite people to kind of share their story, what their struggle has been like. And then in Module 9, I invite them to actually start to share this story with other people. And that can feel like a really big jump, a really scary, intimidating thing. And so I'm curious how that was for you, Brian, to reflect on what this journey has been like, some of the things you've tried, and ultimately how it had been more helpful using ACT. But then to take the next step and actually talking to people in your life about this, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I guess in starting off, most people are going to have the fear-based stories about pornography, and so sharing it is obviously going to be a little bit intimidating, a little bit frightening. And so you really do have to put your willingness meter on high. It's probably the understatement of the century. And specifically for me, in my experience, I had relationships ended because of pornography. And so, I mean, even if it wasn't because of pornography, that just plants that little seed inside of you that, hey, you're not going to be able to have relationships because of this struggle. And so going through the previous modules and now lining everything up for this, when you can exercise putting your willingness on high and start telling people, I think is a really big step. And I remember, I mean, at that point, I'd done ARP, the addiction recovery program. And so I was used to at least saying, hey, I'm Brian, pornography, you know.
Was that like your middle name or your last name?
You know, pretty much at that time. But I mean, it's so interesting to look back on it now, because at that time in my life, I was still so focused on getting rid of this struggle, and I was putting a lot of time into it, that I was talking about it a lot. And so ironically, I think that helped me be a little more open. And granted, for anyone who's heard these podcasts, I've been very open about my struggle, and I certainly don't think that's a requirement or your overcoming the struggle is predicated on you sharing it with the world. That's not realistic. But for me, in my values, it took sharing it with the people around me, and then really wanting to help others. And I feel like I connect really well in a helping sense. If I'm lending a helping hand, if I'm serving, I do feel like that spawns a lot of connection, and I like the genuine connection that comes from that. So in my experience in first starting this, it was coming from a place of, oh gosh, this is scary for me, but I hope it helps. And I think that's what gave me that extra little bit of willingness to take the plunge, to start talking to people. And I was amazed at how many miracles I saw with people validating me and people being willing to talk about it and not judging me. All the people that I told had known me for years, or we had spent time together abroad. And so they knew me for me. They didn't know me for my false middle name of pornography, right? Like they actually knew Brian Johnson. And that was very comforting to me, that even though this struggle was there, Brian Johnson's the person they were talking to.
Yeah.
And I wasn't something to fix. I wasn't a project to work on. I was a person to be loved and cared for and to connect with. And so that was a very powerful experience for me.
So many things that stand out. So you weren't picking like a random person in line in front of you at the supermarket, or someone you had just started dating. I mean, you were opening up to people that you had relationships with, that knew you and had seen you and cared about you across time. And I think that's a meaningful thing, is we want to talk to people in our life, but also you were sharing. You weren't saying, I got to confess something to you. Now I need you to be my accountability buddy. It's like, I actually want to share something with you, what this journey has been like for me. And then the other thing that sounds like really helped you with that willingness part is there was a really powerful value associated with sharing, that I want to share for the purpose of helping other people and connection. And I think having it tied to a value really does help us have some meaning, instead of like, I just got to share to check that off the box that I did it and I'm done. It's like, that's probably not going to be that impactful. It might be helpful to some extent, but having it linked to a value, that I'm doing this to strengthen relationships, but also to see if I can help other people. I mean, that makes all that discomfort worth it when it's associated with a really powerful value like that.
Yeah. And I certainly don't want people to think that I was like on the streets or at a friend's apartment engaging like, oh yeah, they probably struggle with pornography. Like I'm going to bring up my struggle. No, it was very much zoomed out. It was like, I've overcome this struggle, but it wasn't even about pornography. It was about learning to navigate emotions. And I don't have to be a guru to know that everyone on planet Earth is struggling with their emotions, right? Like that's a pretty human condition. And so being able to bring that up in a way where it was like, yeah, here's my experience, and being vulnerable, that really, I mean, that just solidified a lot of positive feelings inside. And I don't know, to not only be validated by someone else, but to be validated by myself in that exercise of willingness. And if I'm the one driving the bus and I turn right, and then all my positive emotions are like, yeah, good job. Like, that's what we want. Like, you still get validation from that. And I think it's just such a beautiful moment.
And that reward, that validation, that connection is right on the other side of fear, or this is terrifying. And those feelings are really strong, but that connection, that benefit, it is right there. It's just like sitting just on the other side of this door. It's like, I don't want to open that door because I don't know what's in there. And oftentimes when you're opening up to decent people in your life that care about you, there's going to be some really meaningful rewards on the other side.
Absolutely. And I think that door can be scary in ways that we don't really anticipate. I think it's a very common fear that if you do open up to someone and be vulnerable with them, that they will shut you down or push you away. And I think that's a rational thing to think about. But on the other side of that, what if they don't? What if they really embrace you? You haven't had that in a long time. That might be weird. You don't know what, like, that human connection that you've wanted for so long, but have pushed away for just as long. You don't know what that's going to feel like. And so I think there's kind of two sides of this coin, that you're afraid of the failure, but you're also afraid of the success.
Yeah.
But one of those is so good and deep and rich, and the other one is it leaves you hollow.
Yeah. And that is a new experience. If we've spent a lot of years withdrawing and pulling back and closing off, to open that door and get that connection, that would feel very new. And for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, this feels really good, but I am not used to that. So a lot of folks I encourage, like, kind of pace yourself in sharing. I wouldn't say, go ahead and post it online for everyone to read it at once. Like, go ahead and have these conversations selectively with people in your life that you want to have these chats with. And you can kind of take some breaks in between to be like, oh, I had that chat and it went really well. I can kind of sit in that and absorb that and process that, and have a few more conversations about that person, or with that person, about who I am and who they are. So I think that's something unanticipated too. When we open up, often it gives permission for them to open up too. So recognizing it's not just you sharing stuff, you're probably going to be receiving things as well, as they feel a lot more comfortable to open up with their struggles, because struggling is universal.
And that's going to feel so good, because, I mean, not because that other person is struggling, but because this struggle in particular is so isolating and so shameful that you really do think you're the only one going through it. And so even to hear that someone else is going through something, I feel like is this weirdly comforting piece of connection, that, like, we're in this together. We can be there for each other. These tough times can be a part of our stories, and we can share them, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is like we've been wandering in the darkness with our little light, and we're the only one. And yet when you share, it's like, oh, here comes another little light. Yep. And it's just a little bit brighter, and we're not completely alone. And we can keep adding to that and develop those communities and that connection. And it just starts with that first conversation. One thing I've seen that's kind of a struggle for folks that have identified as an addict for most of their life, that's kind of the first thing they want to admit or confess, to say, I got to tell you something, like, I'm a porn addict. And it's like, okay, like, I don't know where the conversation goes from there, or how well that would be received. So I'm curious what you've learned, as far as how is it helpful to kind of share versus, like, confess something. And sometimes we confuse those, like, oh, it's the same thing, right? I just kind of say this and get it done. But leading off with I'm a porn addict may not be that connecting. What have you found to be more helpful in sharing kind of your journey?
The first thing I thought of was how limiting just the language is, like the things we can share versus the things we can confess. And, like, I guess I could confess to my friend that, like, man, I really like basketball. And, like, their reaction is going to be like, great, I do too. Like, confession just has this, it's like shame is built into the word. Whereas sharing, I mean, you share food, you share experiences, you share time together. And I think that's a very powerful metaphor for like the imagery behind that is that when I was sharing, it was sharing my experience with people who I've had experiences with.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out that this whole module, I think it's about sharing your story, but just like we learned in module 8, your story isn't porn.
Yep.
It's not about confessing yourself as an addict. It's about connecting with others as yourself.
Yep.
And how powerful that can be. And even if you're just building relationships, pornography might come into play as one of those building blocks, as one of those struggles that you two can share and can navigate. But that's not your whole tower. That's not your whole story. It's just a page. And so for me, I found that sharing my story has really been a part of me. And I've shared about my pornography struggle on podcasts with like tens of thousands of listeners. And I remember being so terrified, like sweating through shirts, like, oh, it's so bad. But the value behind that, like you mentioned, of that deep wanting to help, and that's something that's more of my story than pornography is.
Yep. Like
me sharing is more about me than what I'm sharing actually is. And so it's just, it takes some self-awareness to really navigate this sharing process. But like, there's nothing better than being genuine with yourself and with someone else.
I think that's so well said, and a really key point that in some ways it might be easier just to say, I'm a porn addict. Like, that is playing it safe. It's really not that vulnerable. It's really not revealing a whole lot about yourself. It's not connecting with those emotions and those insecurities. It's just stating a label. That's kind of playing it safe. And so what we're looking for is like, yeah, you can share that you've struggled with pornography. That can be part of your story, but it isn't the story. We actually want to put you in front. Like, pornography in some ways has been a shield of protection. Like, these are why I can't take risks in my life, because this pornography thing, it's been kind of keeping you safe. And now we're saying, you know what? We're going to put you front and center. You get to talk more about things that you've struggled with, things you've learned, things you've overcome, your hopes and dreams. We're going to put the human up front. And behind you, you can say, yeah, and along the way, pornography has taught me some of those things and some of those struggles. That's been what's helped me get to this point. But this is your story. It's not a story about porn.
I don't know if it's like a famous scene in a cartoon or something, but there's always like the spotlight on center stage, and you always like push someone out, or at like in dancing circles, you always like push your friend into the middle, right? So they have to be the ones in the spotlight. And that, honestly, that's what it is. You're just like, if I throw porn out there, no one's going to look at me. And I mean, it's hard to hear that. It's harder to be in that space, but just the fact that there's like a genuine person with talents and traits and characteristics and interests who is totally unique behind that struggle. Like, we're just trying to bring them into the spotlight and clap for them. Like, that's waiting for you.
That's it. And it takes a bit of work to get to that place.
Yeah.
So to be aware of that struggle, be able to put this in context, connect with yourself. And when you're kind of at that point, yeah, it's time to go center stage, push that porn cartoon out of the way, spotlight's on you. And that's going to feel pretty bright. And it sounds like you had a lot of those meaningful interactions with people that you knew, relationships that were well established. But like Brian, you don't ever do anything halfway. Like you also did this in a very public way with podcasts and going to church groups and sharing your story with lots and lots of people. And I'm curious what that has been like to share this even broader with people that you haven't had established relationships. And I'm curious from that, what have you gotten out of that? But I'm also curious if people have kind of reached out to you as you've kind of moved into that center stage position.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And it's fulfilling. I think it's cool that, I mean, your podcast was the first time I really publicly shared my experience. And part of me is terrified to go back and watch that or listen to it, just because I'm sure I was saying everything off the wall. And I remember how nervous I was. That was like the first podcast I'd ever done. But it has been absolutely amazing to see people reach out to me who I haven't talked to in years and say, hey, like I had to get your number from like 3 other people. But I heard you on a podcast and just want you to know that like I always struggled with the same thing. And like it really meant a lot to me. And I felt like I resonated a lot with what you said. And it gave me hope. And just hearing something like that is it's connecting. And I mean, that's kind of the premise of of my intent, was to connect. And I will say that in doing firesides, I've done them or like speaking engagements and sharing my story publicly. There have been in-person times when I don't really know anyone in the audience, and it's kind of like, all right, here we go. But then the most terrifying one I did was in my hometown. Whoa. For a bunch of like these bright-faced teenagers. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Like parents who had watched me grow up were in attendance. Whoa. And honestly, it was interesting to just see the passengers on my bus freaking out completely. And like anxiety must have tripled itself or something, because it just sounded, it was screaming at me the whole time. And honestly, I wasn't even, it did have an effect on me. I wasn't very mindful, and I wasn't as articulate as I have been in the past. But it's been such a cool experience to go through this program and learn the lessons that are so much more than just overcoming porn. Yeah. And it's navigating these emotions and pursuing values. And in doing those very values, I've encountered more emotions. And it takes a lot for anyone to willingly go into that spotlight, knowing that they're not perfect and that people will look at them and make judgments. And so being able to get up in front of all these parents that watched me play sports in high school and tell them that I struggled with pornography that whole time, was it's almost like an out of body experience.
Yeah.
But so powerful and so rewarding. And honestly, I find times like that when it's just like challenging my willingness, like what am I willing to do?
Yeah.
To keep pursuing those values.
That's what I was thinking. It's like, you're like next level, like kind of past that level. Let's go to the next level. Like, let's keep it going. And I was really trying to listen as I was watching you for those feelings of shame. And it's like, I can't even connect with those, where it's like, yeah, my willingness is high and this is really scary, feeling really anxious. man, my value is to keep going and keep growing. And I'm sure there's still those urges to hide and withdraw and protect yourself. That's what shame is. But it sounds like you found a way like, yeah, that can kind of be there. And I'm still going to share and I'm still going to show up. And that can be really scary. And some are more anxiety provoking than others. But I'm going to keep going to the next level. And those emotions are still going to show up to say, Brian, what are you doing? Like, slow down. Don't, these people know you. Don't do this. All those passengers are there. And yet you still have choice to say, welcome aboard. I'm going to share my story. And I just think that's just amazing to hear that.
And it's interesting too. I certainly don't think everyone has to get up in front of crowds and people and talk about this struggle, or even their story. I don't think it's required to pursue that avenue in sharing your story. But I will say that even in starting out, while I was going through this program, and the nerves that built up when you know you're planning on telling someone one-on-one that you've struggled with this, or even just, I mean, there was a time when I wouldn't even hang out with people or spend time with people because I didn't even want the inkling of a conversation that could lead to a conversation about pornography to be a possibility. And so the emotions are the same. It's feelings of anxiety or shame. Is this person going to accept me? I'm bad because of my struggle. They'll know that and they won't love me or care about me. Those feelings still come. I mean, they showed up when I told the first person I ever told, and they showed up when I told hundreds of people in a room. And it's just, I'm not going to say it's linear, but there are patterns to this. And willingness really is the key to getting through those moments, and being able to let that uncomfortability be with you and let your values guide where the bus is going.
Yeah. Huge part of it. And that's why Module 9 starts with another willingness, mindfulness exercise, and probably one of my favorite willingness metaphors. I had another question before we maybe talk about that ultimate willingness question. And I've wondered this because I think when we've had a struggle for a really long time, I think it's difficult to fully see the weight and the toll it's taken on us to be withdrawn and guarded for that long at such a profound level. And I'm curious, the more you've shared and opened up with people, if you've noticed some of whatever that is, if it's a burden or heaviness, start to even go off even more. And I don't even know what to call that, if that's like healing or freedom or liberation. But the more that you do this, do you notice that there's like, wow, like there's even more and more room to breathe that I didn't even know was possible. I'm just curious what that's been like to be shut down for so long and to continually open up if you notice things along that way.
Yeah. 100%. And certainly in me saying it was linear and I feel the same things, that's still a true statement. And also it's true that you do become more okay with that spotlight. And I don't even, maybe the spotlight analogy isn't the best one for this specific concept, because it's just you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important part, is that as you continue to be more and more you, you're going to feel more free.
Yeah.
And more like you have choice in who you want to be, and you get to define
Ooh.
yourself.
Ooh.
And right, yeah. And I think one of the best ways to gauge your willingness is being able to say, like, I can do that bold thing. I can do that willing thing. And I also don't have to.
Yeah.
And I could not share about my pornography struggle for the rest of my life. I have that choice. It's just in my values to talk about it and to share about it. I think this is an interesting one for me to talk about. I think it's always bold to be yourself.
Yeah.
And so as you continue to do that, I think the confidence continues to build, and it's called restoring connections, because you're not only restoring connections with others, but with yourself, and being more okay with who you are. Like, anyone who's struggled with this, odds are they aren't the biggest fans of themselves.
Yep.
And I have been to many of those dark places. And now the fact that I like genuinely love myself sometimes freaks me the heck out. It seems almost unnatural for how long I went without that, but it feels more natural because it's me. Yeah. And I can express myself and love myself and connect with others as myself. And as you continue to do that, you do become more free and you become more of yourself.
Yeah. And it is a bold move to be you. There's so many messages we get that say, you doesn't really work. How about you be like this and act more like that? But the only version of us that really works is us. And as you were talking, it made me reflect on two of my favorite values. And when I see these values being acted out by other people, I'm drawn to them. And that's the values of authenticity and genuineness. And you can just feel it when somebody is authentically who they are. There's no show, there's no filter, there's no makeup crew. It's just them. And they're being genuine. They're in that moment, they're present, they're enjoying those connections. Those are the people I gravitate towards. And I often think about, like, I am drawn to those people. I want to live those values too, so people are drawn to me. And that's what you're demonstrating, is being bold and being who you are, is really living those values of authenticity and genuineness.
And I think that is the greatest gift that comes out of life after pornography. Overcoming your porn struggle is great. And I literally would have paid someone thousands of dollars to just take it away in those years of struggling. But no amount of money could buy being able to access yourself and who you really are. And so learning everything I did in this, it's priceless. And you're right. I think there is something about unlocking yourself that is literally just, it is freedom. Yeah. That's what it is.
That's what it's all about. And I'm surprised with the messages I get from people. And often I hear that, learning these acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness principles in LAP was life-changing and really impactful. And I hear about as often listening to the podcast was so connecting and meaningful. It's like they kind of serve two different functions. The program is a vehicle to teach these principles, give you opportunities to practice them and to grow that. And the podcast, for a lot of people, has just resonated them at a core level. And it's like, yeah, this is what connection feels like. Like, this is a dialogue we're having. We're both being vulnerable and open. There's not a script here. We're sharing. And I like how both of these, the LAP program and these podcasts, are offering different things. to people and just really complimentary. And I hope empowering for others to put that willingness up on high and begin to open up and share their story with others.
I love that. And I would echo that. I think if these podcasts are a way for you to connect, continue to listen, and also try and access this with other people that you have relationships with, because I mean, we've proven here that conversations about sexuality and pornography can be connecting.
Yeah.
And it's it does take willingness.
Yeah.
And
that sexuality,
it's possible, yeah.
Yeah, it is absolutely possible. And I think about sexuality, its core function is to connect. It connects us to who we are, and it connects us to others. And it's not just the acts of sexuality. I mean, those are very connecting with an intimate partner, but conversations about sexuality with friends and with your children, those can be quite connecting as well. That's the purpose of it. And yet, for many of us who didn't get a lot of education or had these conversations model, sex is very disconnecting. And it's like, I don't even want to have that be part of me. And there's no way I'm having these conversations with other. This is not something that brings us together. And this is a meaningful shift where this really core part of who we are at its core and its essence is connecting. The very thing we've been fighting with and struggling that feels like this is going to drive a wedge in all of my relationships forever is the thing that can actually strengthen them.
And that is the most beautiful, ironic fact of all time.
It's amazing. So this kind of brings us to that one of my favorite metaphors in the Life After Pornography program. And for a lot of people, when they get to this point, they've had some successes and they're restoring some connections and they're feeling good with these principles. And so I share this story of like, imagine you're throwing a party and you invite everybody and you're having a great time. And then Joe shows up and he's kind of that unwanted party guest that, you know, kind of tells crude jokes and smells bad and dips his fingers in the punch bowl. And you kind of got options here. I mean, there's good food and good music and you're dancing and having a good time. You can stay in the party and let Joe do his thing, or you can really focus on keeping Joe out. And as soon as we pick up Joe and get him out of the house, we're not in the party anymore. We're not living our life. And so sometimes we do really try to get rid of these thoughts and emotions and urges. And that might just take us away momentarily. Then we get back to the party. But Joe finds another way to get in. He sneaks in through the bathroom window or through the kitchen door, and he shows up. And I think we have this choice where, are we willing to let these thoughts and emotions and sexual urges be there if it really allows us to live the life that we want? That is the ultimate willingness question. And if the answer is like no, like Joe is never allowed in the party, it's like, well, then neither are you. What'll it be? And I think about these thoughts and emotions and urges. They love parties. Like, the better the life that you have, the more likely Joe's going to show up. And I think about that in my own life. Anytime we have a big like holiday or birthday celebration, we have all these expectations and all these plans, something doesn't go well. And we get frustrated and there's disappointment and there's conflict. And we can focus on the thing that's not quite right and miss out on Christmas morning, or miss out on a birthday or 4th of July or a trip or an anniversary because it didn't go just right. We got to get Joe out of there for this to be perfect. And that mindset really does rob us from the essence of living. So are you willing to let Joe be there if it gives you the life that you want?
Yes. I wanted to answer you when I was watching the video, so now I actually get the in-person experience. But you're 100% right. It beautifully sums up everything. It's like full circle. We've been dissecting and learning about Joe and how he is a part of the party, but in order for us to continue to live our lives and enjoy the party and want to enjoy the party, we should put our efforts into enjoying the party and not taking Joe out back and sitting with him in the snow while everyone else continues on, right? And I had never thought of this before, and I hope this doesn't crash and burn, this analogy. But the TV show The Office, some people, I mean, hate it or love it. I'm not sure I know one person who doesn't find Michael Scott like a very cringy character.
Yeah.
And I have been in, like, I've watched it with people who have visceral reactions to the things that he does or says, and totally off the wall. I mean, there's sexual jokes and totally inappropriate comments. And it honestly, it is cringy to watch. But that is, I mean, there might be shows that rival it in terms of all-time popularity, but I can't think of a more well-known show. It is literally part of our culture, like Office references. And so, and everyone knows that when they took Michael out of the show, it got worse.
Yeah.
And not as many people liked watching it. And I just thought of that, and it was just like, are we going to let Michael be in the show? Like, are we going to let things go wrong so that we can still have things go right?
Yeah. That's it. I love that comparison. So Michael is a lot like Joe, and in some ways he is so cringeworthy and so endearing.
Yeah.
There's such a humanness to him. And you're right, I've actually been going through those seasons with my wife. We've been watching those, and we love it. And we're to the second to last season, and Michael's gone, and we're like, I think we're kind of good. And it's like, yeah, he's not there anymore. And part of that is relief, like, oh, phew, it's not going to be as chaotic. It's also lost a lot of its spark and a
Yeah.
lot of its meaning. And that's parties. Like, we're going to burn the chicken sometimes, or we're going to spill the punch bowl, or there's going to be a joke that didn't land very well. And we're going to start to overthink that. We're going to worry. We're going to feel like I can't talk to anybody anymore, or, oh, I found somebody attractive. I shouldn't find that. Or I'm feeling a sexual urge. This just can't be here. But it's like, yeah, it's Michael Scott. Like, he gets to be there. And in a lot of ways, those parts of life make it worth watching, make it worth showing up for.
That's it.
That's the question. So it comes back to this inside-outside rule. If you can't have Joe or Michael at the party, if you can't have sexual urges, you're kind of stuck with Michael or Joe in the snow. You're stuck with it. If you're willing to let Joe in the party, let these imperfections, these human parts of us, these thoughts, emotions, and urges, you are in control. You get the life that you want by creating more space for it. And it really does come back down to that principle. And I like kind of wrapping things up there, because we start to feel pretty good, like, okay, I've kind of mastered this. I don't ever have to struggle with this thing anymore. And then when it comes up, it kind of surprises us, like, no, like, what are you doing here? I fixed this. And it's like, there's no fixing. It is still about willingness and focusing on your values and being in that life instead of trying to control every minute detail that in the end probably just contribute to the experience in the party.
Bring more people to the party, invite more people, build onto your house, bring more games. I feel like there are elements of this analogy that are expansive, and you can build upon them. And it's, Joe can be there, and while he will be giving you information about the punch that he just dipped his fingers into, and it might be too watery or something, which you might need to go fix. you can spend your time talking with the guests, making connections, making memories, having fun, and people might get hurt.
Yeah.
There's life happens, but it's life, and there's going to be good with the bad, and Joe's going to be there regardless of whether you want him to or not.
Yep. That's it. So there's so many concepts and principles throughout the Life After Pornography program. So our next chat on Module 10, we'll be kind of bringing this together. And this is where I offer the compass, the lap compass, to give you a tool to, as you move forward, how do we keep maintaining this progress, keep these principles in mind in a really simplified way. So it takes a lot to kind of learn all these ideas. Module 10 is going to bring it together in a really simple way that you can move forward in your life.
I'm excited.
Well, it's always wonderful as always, Brian. Thanks for joining me in this journey. I really do value these conversations and the connection. I love talking about ACT, but I love talking about ACT with you. And it's not just the concepts. This is something that brings us together. And I really enjoy not just the conversations, but the connection and the relationship that we've really built mostly through these conversations on a podcast. It's amazing to develop a relationship through a podcast.
It is. And I am beyond grateful as well. And I hope that anyone listening can find hope in doing the same thing and find connection.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll wrap this up next time with Module 10 of the Life After Pornography program.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.